Hello, everyone joining us at the Global Youth Summit organized by SLYCAN Trust. Ayubowan, Vanakkam, as we say here in Sri Lanka. This is the last session before we close the summit proceedings. And just to give an overview of what has been happening here at the summit, we started it all off on the 14th with the National Summit, which followed and lasted for 2 days. And then the Global Summit was kicked off on the 16th. And today marks the third and final day of this 5-day summit. And this is the last session before the closing. And we welcome everyone from all over the world. Thank you for joining us. We are live on FB, so you can always, and all our recordings are there. So if you had missed some of our sessions, you are most welcome to look at them. There is a wealth of knowledge that is here and shared, and we're very, very pleased if you could also be a part of this process. My name is Suramya, and our session coordinator today is Ms. Marasinghe, Ms. Chalani Marasinghe. Now, today's session will be in 2 parts. The first part will be our panel discussion on communication, outreach, and climate education. Of course, that means how do we spread our message and making that change. That will be followed by a question and answer session. And then we moved on to the second part of our session where the groups that have been discussing the final presentations or the proposals we had shortlisted at the previous sessions will get together and use the information and knowledge shared by the experts in their own presentations as well. Now, we have 3 groups working on these proposals on thematic areas such as climate change and disaster risks, sustainable food systems, as well as oceans and coastal ecosystems. Now, the groups are buzzing with activity and have incorporated the knowledge they have gained, and we are looking forward to the final outcomes. Now, starting off today's panel discussion on communication, outreach, and climate education, spreading your message and making that change is Mr. Daniel Beckman, who is the CEO of Foodshed.io. Mr. Beckman is the co-founder and the CEO of this particular app that assists to make local food distribution more efficient. He's also an award-winning journalist with awards that include a Peabody Award and an Emmy. Over to you, Mr. Beckman.
That's a great introduction. Let me make sure that my sound is going on. Just so everybody knows, it's about 5 in the morning here. I'm talking to you from San Francisco right now, and I'm really happy to be here, and it's really exciting to have another audience in a faraway place that can kind of understand a little bit about what we're doing at Foodshed. It probably does have some global implications, but I'm going to focus on the US audience because that's where we're doing most of our work, and it may be where we have the most depth to contribute to this conference. So thank you for having me, especially towards the end of it. Overall, what's interesting about what we're doing at Foodshed is we're trying to build the infrastructure for local food distribution in a country that prides itself on delivering food from really far away places. The name Foodshed is actually tied to the concept that like a watershed, for those of you that don't understand or not heard of the concept of a food shed, that in a local community, you should be growing food for the population that lives there. And in most places in the United States, there are local items that can be grown within a food shed, but that they are often sent from very far away places, sometimes within the United States, and then oftentimes the produce travels really far from other countries. And, that's just something that, besides the environment and everything else, it's just something that didn't really make sense to us, that produce would travel such a long distance. When you do that, you're not only adding carbon into the atmosphere and all the things that come with that, it also fundamentally changes what you're able to grow and how you're growing it. In a local area, if you're closer to where the food is being consumed, you don't have to grow produce that's not ripe yet and that has a harder skin or shell on it so that it can make the trip. And the trade-off there is the harder the skin is on a tomato, for instance, the less flavor that you're going to have there. So it's not just, it's funny, sort of a thing with nature, that there is a trade-off between having food that's further away and flavor, and depending upon who you talk to, also nutrition. So it's a more natural system, and it's more resilient when there's environmental interruptions, or in the case of this year, COVID. And so that's why we're working so hard on local food. Let me see if I have any specific questions here. Yeah, just so you know, we are focusing on, I'll answer your questions more towards the end of this, but we are focusing on the United States right now. So this is a case study. Problems in different countries may be different, although our chief science officer has done most of her supply chain work in Africa and in Latin America. So some of the issues that we have here in the United States are the same as those places, believe it or not. So you can also talk to her at some point if you're interested. I wanted to go through this impact statement because I also wanted to let everybody know one thing that we're really proud of, and this year was a really full-blown year for us, operating in 5 states in the Midwestern United States, is that there are accomplishments that can be made that help the environment. And we think that we've attacked some of them, and this is a sheet that kind of explains the impact of some of the work that we were doing. So one major thing that we focused a lot of time on is food spoilage. It's not just that, you know, we're delivering food that's local, but we've built a system where we are trying to make sure the right amount of produce shows up in the store. A third of all produce that you see in a supermarket is thrown out because it spoils before a customer buys it. So there's a lot of opportunity there for us in order to provide a better financial impact, but also environmental impact. So those are some good things to find. We worked with over 41 farms in the Midwest. People were really concerned about this year. We had less people that were touching our food. People were more concerned with food safety this year than ever before because of COVID. And then just the idea that you could actually have the food the same day that it was picked is exciting to people. And I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier about flavor. And the closer the food is to you, the better the flavor is. The other thing that we're trying to tackle here, and you know, when you're dealing with agriculture, there's always a lot of different problems. One thing that we really try to do is help to build up these independent and local farms and have food that's local, that's available year round. No matter what community you're in, there generally is something that we can work with, whether it's an indoor greenhouse, which can be helpful. There's a lot of options and flexibility with those kinds of places, and they're expanding their footprint more and more. So yeah, just a few other things here. You know, when you decide to spend more money locally, it also has some spillover effects in terms of the community. It provides more food for people that are hungry, believe it or not, because you're actually growing food in that community, and some of it may not be perfect produce, but it then creates a different grade of produce that's being shipped around and is easier to access. And then also just the idea that you keep more resources in your community and that you can grow these farms. You know, it's weird, but you may not consider it from this point of view, but it's also a national security priority to make sure that you can feed your population. So there's a lot of benefits to why we're working so hard on getting a local food system. And we've set one up in New York, but we've been spending most of our time in the 5 states around St. Louis in the Midwest. And that's basically where we're starting to have our greatest effect. I thought I might open up the floor to some questions here about what we're doing, and I'm happy to talk about any of the points that I've come up with here. So yeah, I think in terms of Nigeria, we'd be happy to have a conversation at some point about how things are going there and how your food system differs, and if there's a way that we could work with your food system. We're happy to talk about that. But other than that, we're happy to answer any other questions that you have.
Thank you. I think there is a lot of questions that's in my mind as well, in terms of like how and what, and like how much time do you actually and effort does it take to manage this on a daily basis. So there's a lot of questions, and I'm sure a lot of you all will also have the same questions and many more. So if you do have any questions, please do ask. We will have the questions after all the presentations, if that is all right, so that you have time to type it into the chat box. If you do have questions in our on Facebook, we will also moderate it and bring it here so that we can ask those questions. So questions are important because if we are to move forward, these are the things that will help, and the inspiration that we have got from you is priceless, really. So thank you very much, and we appreciate that you had to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and that is dedication. So there's a lot of love coming from SLYCAN Trust to you as well. Now I am inviting Mr. Duncan Williamson, founder of Nourishing Food Systems, to take the screen, so to speak. Mr. Williamson is an environment, sustainable consumption and food systems expert, and he has worked in the sustainable food systems sector for nearly 20 years. He was also part of our Just Transition Summit, and we are very delighted to have you back. So thank you very much. Mr. Williamson, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. What a very, very kind opening and introduction. So yeah, what I thought I would do is I would talk to you about some work I did quite a long time ago at WWF, and how we got a message around food systems wrong, and how with a bit of careful thought and discussion and learning lessons, we managed to get it right, and how the message became relevant and is still relevant today. So I worked with WWF for 10 years. I still work with colleagues there now. And I led the work on food systems, and it was myself and my team who are responsible for WWF working on sustainable diets. Now they have a massive program of work. It's a global program of work. They've released a report called, I think it's the Plan Eat Guide. And it's really trying to scale up the concept of sustainable diets and food systems, so everyone can recognise there are triple wins for biodiversity, for climate, and for health. But when we first started on that work, which was in 2010, it was work that was widely unpopular in WWF and externally. I think I was one of the first people for an environmental NGO still to say sustainable diets was something we had to look at. We had to look at people's consumption. It wasn't just enough to talk about production efficiencies. But it was like, how do you talk about it? And I sort of went into it with this view that I knew many of the answers. I knew the answer. You know, if everyone goes vegan, that's going to be the solution. It's all going to be about organic food. It's all going to be about local markets. You know, GM is bad every single time. Yada yada. And I said a whole load of assumptions. And over the first year, and I think this is the crucial first lesson I learned, was over the first year, I discovered most of my assumptions were not correct. Some of them were not wrong, but they weren't correct. I based it on, I'd almost had a personal bias on some of the evidence I chose to use. So I went out and looked at all the evidence and made a point of looking at the other side of every story, every assumption I had, to come up with a more nuanced approach to diets. Sorry. And then we went out and we did some research. We commissioned some researchers, the Rowett nutritional body up at Aberdeen University, to look at the carbon footprint of diets, look at the carbon footprint of healthy diets as defined by governments, and to see which one, if either, would lead to significant greenhouse gas emission reduction, what it would look like, and would it meet the climate targets as were being set out in 2010. And so they went off, they did that, and they produced this report. And unsurprisingly, this report said you had to eat less meat. You had to, if you're in England, you had to eat an awful lot less meat. You had to eat a lot less junk food. You had to eat more fruit and vegetables. You had to waste less food, and you had to eat a little bit of dairy. And so we got very excited. We thought we had the evidence. We went out, we published the report. It was my fault. I published it like this. And the big, we published it, and we focused on the eating less part of the change in the diet. And when we went out, we got attacked by media in every single country that picked it up. We were attacked by the British media, the American media, the Canadian media, the Australian media, the media in India, because we were basically being accused of trying to take out the fun and the pleasure from diets. We didn't know what we were talking about. We were trying to dictate what people ate, and we were attacked savagely, and it almost led to the closing of the program. But we did have solid evidence. The paper was peer reviewed. We knew what people needed to do. The evidence was there. We went out. And so we were happy with the evidence, but we just second checked it. And we found that was really important. Let's check the evidence base. We then went out to other experts to try to identify what went wrong. And the simple fact that with the communications around this, we led on climate change, which no one at the time wanted to hear about. We led on eat less and going without, and we didn't go out with a strong message on the positives. So we licked our wounds, we went away, and we asked, one thing we did ask the researchers do was say, will this diet cost more? Because price is so important. So they went away and they costed and showed that a sustainable diet wouldn't cost any more money. It would cost exactly the same as an unhealthy diet. The only challenge people would have, this mainly for the UK, would be that the diet will take a little bit more time to prepare. So, and we were in a very fast culture. No one likes spending 10 minutes to cook. Ironically, everyone said they didn't have time to cook, but the most popular television programs in England at the time were cookery programs. So people would spend half an hour watching cookery programs because they couldn't cook and they didn't have time to cook. But anyway, so we looked at it and we rejigged our messages, and we decided to learn from our lessons, and we republished the report after 9 months to the same media outlets. And what we did was, we first of all demonstrated that a sustainable diet is as affordable as an unsustainable diet. And then the messages we led on, instead of leading on meat, the first we simplified our messages to 3 to 4 words for each message. We had 6 clear messages. We didn't put any value statements under it. So we didn't say choose organic. We didn't say choose local. We didn't say choose seasonal. We just kept the messages as simple as possible, underpinned by a weight of evidence. And we went out with eat more plants. That was it. Eat more plants. The next message was eat a colourful plate. So both of those were very, very positive messages that no one could argue with. The next message was waste less food. And again, you couldn't argue with that. And we also pointed out that that saved money. And then we went into the big one of eat less meat. We didn't say go vegan, we didn't say go vegetarian, because the evidence then, and I would argue the evidence now, says that's one option you can take, but you don't need to do it. And for some people, some cultures, some income groups, meat is a fantastic form of nutrition. Then we talked about eat certified foods, and then we said eat less junk food. And when we published this report, we were hailed by these same newspapers, the Daily Mail in the United Kingdom, from calling us, I think they actually called me an eco-fascist in the first article. They said that we were groundbreaking and we were the saviors of diets. We have shown a way forward and how we can have healthy diets and meet climate change targets. And we got some of the most positive press and coverage for any piece of work that we'd worked on food. And that just led us going forward. We knew that we because of that, we suddenly went from people not talking to us to people talking to us. We developed this project over the next 10 years. We developed sustainable diets for different countries. We developed it as a global practice. We developed partnerships with many companies, and we always came back to the same strong messages, which are still being used by WWF today, 10 years on, about eat more plants, etc. And we almost never speak about, or we never spoke about climate change until recently, when climate change was a lot more acceptable. We spoke about health, we spoke about culture, we spoke about taste, flavor, family, and we spoke about affordability. And then we were bringing climate change, because lots of studies that we had found as an organisation at WWF, and is being continued to be demonstrated in work I'm doing now with people like Chatham House and Nourish Scotland. Climate change doesn't get people excited and often turns people off when you're communicating about these issues. But if you can talk about something that is close to them, to what they care about, to what they're interested in, such as food, such as the nature outside their doorstep, such as money, the affordability, people will engage a lot quicker. And sometimes to get climate change commitments, you don't even need to talk about climate change. And that's been a lesson that has stayed with me. So yeah, that's what I want to say about communications. It's sometimes taking a step back and thinking differently to get your message across. But always make sure you've talked to lots of people to make sure it can land, because we didn't the first time, and make sure you've got a wealth of evidence to sit behind very, very simple messages. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that is probably the way forward as well, to keep it simple, to keep it as positive as possible, and hope that that is something that people could engage in, because it's not just doom and gloom, but it is the reality, however, is quite gloomy at present. So I think it is something that we need to work on, communication, which is why it is something that we have to learn. And I think our groups and the youth will also take this into consideration when you are presenting, when you're pitching your proposals, and how you move forward with your ideas. The planet needs you, the climate, we need to make that change in our decisions, and go in for sustainable living. But how are we going to do it, and how should we move forward, is a very important question. Thank you very much, Duncan, if I may call you. That was very insightful. And of course, the questions are open. You can ask as many questions as possible. But until then, we will move on to our next speaker, who has been a driving force of this youth summit. She has been both behind the scenes as well as in this now as the face of our next speaker. This is none other than Ms. Senashia Ekanaika. She is the Program and Communications Manager at SLYCAN Trust, and she is the one who makes things happen. So she will be talking about SLYCAN Trust as well as the youth, as well as youth engagement in education. So let us speak to and see. Senashia, over to you.
Thanks, Ramya, and thank you for the very flattering introduction. And thank you, Duncan and Daniel, for that. I think it also set a lot of context, I would like to think, for what I'm about to say. I want to maybe speak less so on maybe publishing your message out to the world, but more so if you're going to look at in terms of the projects that we're developing, on how to communicate within these projects. I've been, so just a bit of background, I've been in the scene of environmental and climate change development communications since 2013, and I've been with SLYCAN Trust since January, and I would like to share what I've learned over the years with you, and I hope that it's something that you could take forward to your project as well. So just quickly, these are the areas that I want to talk about, and elements of these have actually been brought up by the earlier speakers, and I'm very grateful that it was done so, and it also shows that you know, it's the same messaging and it's the same method in which we've been communicating that has been you know, taken down the lines. So, but just want to maybe start off with two main things on and two important things that I would like everyone to maybe keep in mind when you're looking at climate change communications. And the first thing is, what is communication? And I really want to go back to our textbook definition of how we define communications, and that is, it comes down to the act of, conveying meanings or messages from a single person or an entity to another group through, mutually understood science symbols or language. This is what we learn in school or university. And I want everyone to maybe keep that in mind, as well as the next important thing of our target audience or stakeholders. Most projects, and I've been kind of hovering into the different breakout groups. You have identified stakeholders, which is great. And it's important to identify these stakeholders because the needs of these stakeholders would differ. And similarly, the communications outputs that we generate for all of these stakeholders will also differ. And also the last point that I put on, we are an outside, and this is something that Sven mentioned in his earlier presentation, if you all were there for it, is when we take a project to, let's say, a community, we are taking our knowledge, we're taking our tools into an existing system. And we must ensure that when we do such projects that we are not intruding on this, and we should be mindful of the technology and tools and methods of communication that they would already have, and see how best we could use that existing knowledge to supplement our work. So just a few things, just keeping those two in mind that I want to go through. So these are a couple of stakeholders that we work with. So in the background, we have, this is from our previous youth forum that was held last year. That is Mr. Sathara Singha, Director of Ecosystems. So yeah, this is from our previous youth forum pre-COVID. Over here, we have Pilini engaging with some of our communities in Mangrove, I believe. And then we have in the middle, Dr. Tony Pradeep Kumar from the Marine Environment Protection Authority, and these are a few private stakeholders that we engaged with. So as you can see, the setting of the different stakeholders and also like how we would communicate with them also differs. So just quickly moving on to messaging, and this is pretty straightforward. This would mean like, what are you trying to communicate? So this could be in your project activities, if you have launched a report, and I think Duncan very well explained this in one of his points on, when you're messaging, you try to keep it simple and positive, because at the end of the day, you are going in, you need to look outside from within, and you need to see how that will be accepted. So your messaging would basically be, it could also be like a project output, or it could be a capacity building program that you want to do. And I'm going to maybe use these two examples. There are longer project names for these, but I'm just using this because it's easier. So I'm just very briefly going to mention like two projects that we do. Project on mangrove restoration that works in two areas in Sri Lanka, where we aim to restore and conserve mangroves while also providing livelihood options. Some of the key stakeholders that we work with there, our donor is from the private sector. And we also work with local communities and the local government. And our Meatless Monday program, of which Suram is actually advocacy manager for, is to promote, and advocate for sustainable consumption and production. And the stakeholders that are identified there are the local governments and vendors and individuals who promote these lifestyles and general public. So now that we've identified who the stakeholders are, the messaging that will also kind of be curated to them will be vastly different. So leaving that aside just for a bit, I'm going to move on to language. And again, these are just things that I also picked up from the presentations that we had the previous few days. And this is something Donna from IFRC mentioned yesterday on, we need to stay away from jargon in as much as it is important in the international sphere, and we talk about resilience, adaptation, disaster reduction. It's important to talk about these, especially in terms of policy development. But when we take our work to the ground, we tell people that we are giving them new employment opportunities, we're guaranteeing them safe housing. It shouldn't be words that will scare them away. Also, because we are going to a community that's not ours. So we also need to be mindful of that. And again, you will always come back to your stakeholders and kind of curate your language. Sorry, started thundering. You'll curate your language to make sure that it is in accordance with the language that your stakeholders speak. And moving on quickly to medium. And over here by language, I will I referred like to the language as we know it. Here in Sri Lanka, in addition to English, the main local languages are Sinhala and Tamil. And it's also maybe when you're looking at medium, important to understand the socio-economic cultural factors in, say, the community you're working in, whether it is a research project or an implementation project, and also be sensitive to them. One of the things, for example, in our Mangrove project that we do, while the implementation activities and the capacity building sessions are happening, there is also research done on trying to understand the demographic of the area, the ethnic breakdown, number of men, women, because that way, once we have like a clear understanding of who lives there, what they do, what do they need, we are able to curate our messaging accordingly. And comment, I think one of the most, I would say, when you think of communication, it's like the first thing that everyone thinks of, how are you going to communicate it to them? And not to say that it's not important, but I would say that unless and until you have an understanding of all of the previously mentioned factors, it doesn't matter, if you know the tools. And I think we also have to think and be mindful, even though, say, we live in, most of us who have joined this call, I would assume would live in a city or would live in a place, obviously, that has access to internet. But when we communicate to different stakeholders, we need to be mindful that they might not have access to internet, they might not have access to electricity, some might not be able to read. So I think looking at like different forms of media and not only what you're comfortable with is always important. And just like a very quick example of what I've seen over the years, especially with related to communicating disasters and like early warning systems in Odisha, which is an eastern Indian state, in the city of Puri, which is very close to the coast. They have an early warning system that will alert the community of cyclones that are coming. So they have an SMS tree from what we were told when we went on a visit there. So someone from, I would assume, the department would message some person in the village, and the SMS would go down, so people could actually then evacuate or make preparations and so on and so forth. And similarly, I know here in the city, certain cities have Facebook groups, which I hadn't heard of until a friend told me, and they said, if there's like a curfew in the area, or there's a water cut in the area, and these are simple ways of, you would communicate that you wouldn't think of, using a Facebook group to communicate with people in your neighborhood. So again, the tools that you use will be dependent on first, what you are trying to communicate, and second, who your stakeholders are. And just a few other things that I think also need to be considered when looking at communications. First of all, the frequency, that is basically how often you communicate. And this would also depend on the tool, and this is also linked with the sustainability of the communication. So how do you sustain your communications with your stakeholders? Because at the end of the day, communication is linked to building partnerships and increasing your rapport with people that you would want to work with in the long run. But once let's say a project is over, how do you maintain the communications with them if you want to, and also how do you make sure that the work that you started has been continued? And also, I think it's important, I think now more than ever, everyone realizes that building partnerships is important because people cannot work in silos. So this brings me to my next point. I think all of these are kind of interrelated on budgets and project budgets. One thing I've seen is that over the years, communications isn't always prioritized, and I also understand why. There isn't always a budget allocation for comms work, because someone can do the comms work, someone can send out a tweet, someone can write a blog post, that's fine. But at the end of the day, if it's not allocated for, that means you're also not putting enough importance to it. And if you're not going to put importance to it, no one is going to know about the work that you do. And therefore, it's going to be difficult unless you get your work out to build those partnerships and to get into those networks. And which also connected with budget comes with all your human resources or your tools. You can have the money to do a project, but do you have the people to do these things? And also in terms of tools, you could have the money or the person, but you could be in the middle of a jungle or a village, and you cannot upload a video, or you cannot put it up on social media. So I think a lot of things that you need to kind of look into like take into context when incorporating comes into your projects. And finally, I would say, like, any other sensitivities that you need to take into consideration, especially like if you've done like a baseline analysis on your socio-economic cultural factors. You, for example, you wouldn't want to implement a project on, say, good governance in an area that's just coming out of like a civil war, or especially in this like a during pandemic, you wouldn't want to encourage people to, given that a lot of people have lost their main sources of income and have lost, housing and a lot of other things, you wouldn't want to, encourage people to eat a certain way, because that's probably like what Duncan said. Right? Sometimes, eating meat is probably the only way that they can afford to, get their required amount of nutrition. So I think I also maybe touched on some of these examples while talking, and I'm just going to leave with maybe three takeaway messages. And one is one of the most cliched, and I can't believe I even used it, but it's really important to localize your communications products. I mean, what happens out there in the world, what happens in the UNFCCC, what the reports that are published by the IGCC are important, but how is that resource relevant to the community you're working in? What will they learn from it? And obviously, it's not in the local language. How can you localize it? How will you make that community understand the importance of what's happening? And also, I think two other things which I think make a really big difference, especially when it comes to development sector communications, is one of the first things is to have your heart in it. Honestly, I think a lot of the times, if you really believe in what you're doing, your message really comes through. And I would really like to use the example of Suramya, who runs the Meatless Monday program. She is a practicing over-lacto vegetarian, and she is actually able to bring that message out. And I think when you put a message that you genuinely believe in, it really comes through. And I think if anyone is interested in getting into communications, please do. There's a dire need of communicators in the development sector, but also maybe focus on getting a specialization in an area that you're interested in and becoming an expert in communicating that. And Fon's degree is nice. I definitely edit better videos, but having a specialization in a like a thematic area will definitely help enhance your method of communicating. So thank you very much, and I am happy to answer any questions that are within my capacity.
Thank you, Sinasha. I think that is such a fabulous way to put everything across, especially to the youth who are watching, because this is what we need to understand. You might have like this fabulous idea, it might be groundbreaking, but it is also important that you communicate it and put it across in a way that people can understand and get and engage in as well. So with that, we will start our question and answer sessions. We have got quite a number of questions, but there are more. If you do have any more to ask, please do so. I will start off with Sinasha, because you're already in here, and and you highlighted quite a number of aspects in communication as well. This comes from Dennis. He says that you have highlighted the factors that are important when addressing different audiences. How can we make sure that we actually connect with the audience? Is there a good way of monitoring and like an evaluation process that can impact our communication efforts and continually improve them based on this? Is there a way that we can see whether this is successful or not? Of course, Duncan had first-hand experience in sort of quite a drastic way, but is there any other way that we can find it out?
Thankfully, I haven't had such a drastic experience, at least not yet. But I think that's a very important and even an interesting question. I think, see, again, we need to look at, I think, practical and even limiting factors. So if you're going to look at in terms of like a project that you're implementing, you need to look at the timeline. So, how much of time do you actually have to build a relationship with those people? And I think for us, SLYCAN Trust has been very fortunate to also have field officers and research officers who are from the area. So when we work in that area, I think there is an instant connection to them. I think we have Tilini on the call, who is from Anuradhapura, and for example, when we work with the farmers in the area, when we go with Tilly to the area. They know that, you know, we are going with someone they could trust, and I think trust is one of the best ways, and you would know that someone trusts you when they open up to you. And like, even when maybe doing like a survey, it's important to have, like, you know, build rapport. You ask generic questions, you ask how people are. You need to take time to actually understand and sensitize yourself with your stakeholders. So how do I know whether your communication is successful or not? That's interesting. So I mean, like with Duncan's example, you will definitely first know if it's unsuccessful. But I think if it's successful, I think there's always, especially with direct beneficiaries, there are always people who come back and who say, and another way of probably gauging success is if a donor wants to work with you again, that means your project was successful and your communication has actually worked. So I hope I answered that.
Yes, thank you. Yes, that would definitely be an indicator. So the next question goes out to Dr. Beckman. Are you there? Yes, you are. I think so.
I'm muted.
Yes, yes. Here you are. So this question comes in from Dennis, who wants to know, what would you say are the low-hanging fruits when it comes to reducing spoilage and food miles and making supply chains local? What measures that are easy to implement without high requirements in capacities, resources, and technology, especially thinking of developing countries, especially in how to get farmers and sellers to start down this path?
Well, that's a lot there. I think that unfortunately there isn't, in each case you have to look at like how the system works right now. I can say that in terms of food waste, if you don't start by measuring how long, you know, there's a few points that you can just measure, even in the most, in any food system. What's the distance between the farm and where somebody eats something? How long does it take to get to that person? How long does it sit on the shelf? If you start to measure this stuff out, a lot of places when they're ordering food right now, they're just doing it based on what they did last time when they're making their orders. Having this information can allow them to make better decisions. On the other side, with food waste, this is a little bit complicated, but if you really reduce food waste, it is better for the environment. But you also want to make sure that you're not putting the farmer in a bad position, because it is easy for a buyer to just be like, oh, well, I'm buying 5 apples instead of 10. And so that's great for me. The 5 apples that he or she is buying need to be of more value because of the system that you're providing for them, because those apples are not being thrown away, if that makes any sense. You want to do a situation where the farmer is getting paid a little bit more for that work. Maybe you're even getting paid some money for the work that you're doing, and they're paying less money than they would have otherwise, if that makes any sense. So you have to start actually providing the data there so that you can start measuring these things. I would say that even in the most basic ways, without the technology that we have, that's a good way to get started.
Right. Thank you. We also have the next question to both Daniel and Duncan, in terms of the people and the consumers who are gathering around your approach. Do you still think that they represent a wide spectrum of in society, or a limited segment in terms of high income, educated, ability to get the resources to these sources? But do you feel that it is just a segment, a limited segment at the moment?
I appreciate this question because it's part of why we do what we're doing and the way that we're doing it. We did start in New York and New York City, and there's always a part of, well, there isn't always, but there's a lot of interest in trying to serve a very affluent market. And in most cases, there are people that are trying to serve that market around the world. What we've been trying to do in the Midwest here in the United States is make it so that when we're selling our produce, it's at or near the price of what we're replacing it with. And so you can't really argue with that. If we are already doing this and we've gotten it to a certain scale and the price isn't different than what they're paying right now, what's the big deal? So the way that we're able to do that is that we plan the season ahead of time and we get the buying power from the retailer ahead of time. The prices are not the best that a farmer can get, but they can secure their season with it. And the volume is big. So if they can handle that volume, then it's something that helps to solidify their farm. And it is important that the efforts that we're doing reach towards being available to everybody, because there aren't enough rich people in the world. There's plenty of people that don't have access to produce at all, or quality produce, or stuff that has flavor or nutritional value. So, we're not really doing a good job if it's not available for a wide market. The other side of it, obviously, is we need to make sure that farmers are taken care of, or this whole thing won't really work. So it is tricky, but that's where, if you're running the system better and more efficiently than what's happening right now, you can get some cost savings so that everybody's happy. And it's tricky and it takes work, but if you don't have enough scale, if you're not having enough flowing through your system, that would be the first thing that I would start to work on. And it is tricky because then you got to convince a place to trust you and trust these new farmers. But it's taken us, for instance, 3 years to get to this point where we have a very sizable program with a major retailer in the United States, and we're starting to grow into other ones. Unfortunately, it can take more than one season to gain the trust and to get onto their shelf and then to continue from there. But that's how we're doing it. And I don't think it's a bad idea to try to do it for people who have a lot of money. It's just not the goal in the long term for actually building a nationwide and then a global local food system. And I'll also add that there are parts of the world, I don't know a lot about every single part of the world, but where they have very comprehensive local food systems right now. And they never left them. Local food was the original food system, for sure. So, there are some places that do better than others at this already.
Yes, thank you very much. You also answered like a question that I had in terms of how long it took for you all to like meet the success rate that you really you were aiming for. So obviously it is still a work in progress, but so the 3 years is something that you really had to work for to get that. So it's something also that we have to understand, that sometimes communication, it also takes time, and it's just that you have to continuously work and evolve as you go. Duncan, do you have something to add to this as well in terms of whether if this particular thing is for a limited segment or for the wider society?
I think engagement with it's still very limited. I know I'm very guilty of living in an echo chamber where almost everyone I know works in food, talks about biodiversity, or are farmers. And so that's all I talk about. But when I step out of this world and talk to, say, my friends when I'm playing football, most of them don't care. They're really not engaged. It's not their world. And they all live in England. They're all backgrounds. They're working class. They're builders. There's a solicitor there and a doctor who plays. They don't really care. They want to make sure they eat food they like, and that's what they're engaged with. And what I've noticed when I've tried to look at it is you've got some really engaged groups of people who really are passionate about it, and they're important opinion formers, and they get their voices heard. The assumption is they're often sort of middle class or higher or middle class or upper class, but that's normally because they've got a bit more money, so that their worries can be directed towards where their food comes from, not just getting food. The other group is the youth. Youth people are a lot more engaged with it than the older generations. They're really interested in where their food comes from, and I think that's not just about nutrition, but climate, biodiversity loss, and the fact that other generations may have failed on that. But I also think they're the other. It's key, because when I first started working on food systems, and it was about 15 years ago, I really moved away from working in agriculture to food systems. No one was working on it. It wasn't even on the radar. I've never seen something go up the radar so quickly and so many people talking about it, but it's still a minority. But the fact it's got so big so quickly, there's so many companies looking at it, now's the time to really push for change, because the change we're going to see is going to be when governments change and put the system in place to enable the people whose worries are not food worries, to the default setting for them is always going to be access to healthy, nutritional, local food. And that's where the big change is happening. But I think we're getting to that groundswell. We're seeing, I know food is going to be part of COP26. We've got a food system summit this year. We're seeing the Food Cities Network. C40 did a wonderful discussion on this. We've got the Milan Urban Protocol. We've got the Fork to Farm work that I'm doing in North Scotland, where there's a movement building, and this movement is starting to get there. And stuff that you're doing as well is really important in this area. So I think change is happening, but there's not as many people as I would think are involved in it, because I live in my bubble. But the other thing I'd say is really important is when we're talking about it, I've been doing a bit of work on values and understanding what are people's values and what decides people's food choices, and how that's important. And I think as soon as we put our own values on what is right on food, on the choices, we turn off most people. So if someone can't afford organic and you say organic is the answer, straight away that person thinks you're wrong. But if you say eating more fruit and vegetables is the answer, and I don't care if it's organic, I don't care if it's shipped from New Zealand, I don't care where it comes from, the person particularly has less interest or less money, wants the cheapest option, but they want to still know they're doing right. So you encourage them to do that and forget about any of your own personal values. And I think that is key to making some of those changes.
Thank you. And I think there is also another question. I think, Duncan, you can take this as well. Speaking about, from Dennis, speaking about the validation of data and how important and that there is a difference, what a difference messaging can make. So you have obviously spoken about the food systems and how that made a change in the messaging that you used. Do you have any ideas or suggestions for any other aspects of climate action or sustainability? How can we change this? Because do you have any ideas that we can use? Or have you come up with any ideas that any examples that you can share with us?
I'm just trying to think. I think it's a great question. I do spend too much time thinking about what I put in my stomach.
We all do.
Yeah.
Guilty.
Exactly. Yeah. So I finished lunch and I'm thinking about dinner. But I suppose a few examples. I'm a really big believer that if you've got the money or how you spend your money is so important. So, or don't spend it. So it breaks my heart, say, looking at the state of the fashion industry and its carbon footprint and its social footprint, and the fact that people in my country waste clothes. It's a sad fact that the average t-shirt will be worn 5 times in the UK before they throw it away, because fashion is moving so quickly. I know you look shocked, but it's moving so quickly. And I just feel that we need to re-engage with how we spend money and just not buy so much stuff. And I really think this counts for the middle classes all over the world. And I think it's so important to buy less stuff. I think with clothes, buy less clothes and don't throw them away, recycle them. And I think that's so important. And I'm seeing that change happening. The green fashion trend is starting to grow. And I think it is one of the most important trends. And the other one I've noticed is happening globally is around technology. People are not treating technology as disposably as they did. So when Apple, who I've got, I'm not a fan of, they drove disposable technology as their model. So people would, get a phone. Oh God, it's obsolete or it's out of date after a year. So you'd have queues around the block to buy the next Apple phone, the next Apple computer, the next Apple podcast. Samsung's done it. All the phone companies have done it. But there's now a growing recognition about the environmental impact of every phone you get has got a really bad impact. And there's a growing recognition of that. And there is a slowly building movement around the fact that you don't need to upgrade your phone every year or every 2 years. You should use it until the end of its life, and then you should recycle it. And I think that change is coming slightly from people, but it's also coming from the technology sector, and it gets me very excited because I think it's such an important change, because it shows how a sector can self-police itself to do what is right for the environment and for climate.
Thank you very much. And there are like many questions that is coming on the chat box, and we need to address it, but I think we have a time factor also, so we will go in for one more question to Danielle, if you're there. Yes. In terms of campaigns and especially because we have one from hold on, let me just get this from Dinetra as well, because they're currently working on a group, and then I think this question is kind of important for them as well. To Dr. Beckman, for this event, one of the project proposals is focusing on developing an app to reduce food waste. One of the project aims is to connect consumers directly to restaurants and supermarkets. For example, if a bakery has excess food from its breakfast sales, it can sell that remaining food to consumers for a fraction of price. So his question is, how can we reduce delivery costs? And whether if you have any examples or insights to this matter.
Again, I do think that these problems are somewhat, it's necessary to tackle them in a local way, because things might be different here than they are in other places. But I can tell you what we've been doing. We have the farmers share, and we understand, and this can get really complicated, or it can be something that it's still more complicated than a spreadsheet to do it better than I think that people are doing it right now. But just trying to understand if there's space in trucks that are empty right now. One thing that we think has been really helpful for us that reduces waste, or in terms of transportation, is the retailer that we're working with. They drive their trucks from a distribution center to stores, and then almost the entire time they come back empty. So they do need to turn on refrigeration, which costs them a little bit more money, but the overlay of local farms to their local stores is pretty close. So we can have them drop a trailer somewhere. Our farmers can load that up, even if it's not completely full. And we're making better use of something that's already moving. It does cost money though, so it's not free, but it is cheaper in some cases than hiring another service, or in some cases the farmers doing it themselves. And then you have farmers that are delivering things. The more that you can understand all of the trucks that you have available and all of the farms that are out there, you can build a system to optimize for that. And those trucks are dedicated to the purpose of moving food. They just may not be used heavily. So that's how we're doing it. Our system continues to become more complicated all the time. You get to an Uber style system. That would be something that we would like, where there's farms that may not know each other and there's no talking that needs to be involved, and there's an app that helps them to move things. But it's not a bad idea to start with the easier ways of doing this, where farms in the same area at least are coordinating when they're making deliveries.
Thank you. And I think that Dinetra would take that back into his group as well. Okay, let me we can go in for a little longer. So I hope the panelists and wouldn't mind it too much, because there are lots of questions coming in. So it's wonderful that we can share your skills and knowledge here. We have one from Bosita to Danielle. So she says that you have been in many messaging processes and campaigns, etc., etc. What do you consider the most successful communication effort of yours? What were the factors in these messaging processes that connected with people? And whether if it was food systems, climate change, election processes, is there anything that you could share with us?
Are you talking about the consumers that buy it, the customers, or are you talking about what convinces retailers that this is something that they should be doing, or both?
In general, yes.
Well, this is something that's different for us than what I think a lot of people have been trying. And we think about this is something in 2 hours we're going to be thinking about. If you think about a shelf space, and I don't know, globally, it's probably similar where produce will be found. Think about how much space you have there in order to convince somebody of anything. The most important things you got to convince them of is what the item is and how much it costs. So that's something that's universal. You're going to have a price there in most cases. If you have any other space to do anything else, people are busy, and so you want it to be something that's attractive, and you don't want them to have to read what used to be known as a telephone book, but might be something like, really complicated, like a dictionary. So you don't have a lot of space there. I would say that the same is true with pretty much anybody that you're trying to convince of this. So when I hear them talk about, we have to educate them and we have to convince them of these things, I think of a person like who has this boulder and they're trying to push it up a mountain and they're not going to get anywhere. And maybe they'll get a few inches. And I really want them to know it's sustainable. And, they're trying. And that's really difficult. And you may not get anywhere with that. You can keep trying. And I think a lot of people want, we need to have them pay more. We need to have, all of that is something to try. But what I found is it just so happens that nature is on our side in this. We have a better product than the stuff that comes from really far away that's engineered to make a long trip. So if you can actually provide this better product for them and you can have them try it, it's undeniable. You don't need to know how to read. You don't have to speak the same language if it tastes better. So that's number one. Make sure your farmers are growing something that's better than what they can get far away. And chances are that they can if they're doing a good job, because you have nature on your side with that. And then the other thing is, you do have to try to compete on price. And I know that that's difficult, but we've talked here about ways that you can convince them that you might be making something that's more valuable without having to sell people on it. If you're throwing out less of it, for instance, because you have a really good system in place, that's one way to convince them. You can talk about sustainability, food miles, helping the environment, all of these things. And some places are interested in that. But if you can tackle the price and the quality of the product issue, then you're competing on the same basis as that stuff that's from far away. And you win on quality for sure. On price, you might come close. You never know. You may not know what they're paying. They may pay a ridiculously low price. It might be subsidized. There could be some weird things going on. And so then that's when we reach for the food waste part. Capitalism is brutal. And it's unfortunate in a lot of cases that people are all trying to get as much as they can in every instance. I just think that it's a lot harder to convince people that they need to pay more than they are right now for food for a number of reasons. And if you can get that shelf space and you demonstrate that you can, once you're there, that you can do a better job of selling it and convincing people, even on those arguments, then, you know, that's a good goal. And it's not like something that we're giving up on here. But, you know, I'll tell you this, because we did just have an election here in the United States, and I don't know how many of you have been following it. But, you know, obviously, most recently, it was determined that Biden was the official winner. But with the other elections that we had here, the Democrats mostly lost. And one problem that the Democrats have that the Republicans don't have is that the Democrats not only need to win, they need to win the argument. And the Republicans just are happy with winning, and then they have the power. And so I like to take the Republican point of view. You get on that shelf, if you're starting to deliver these things, if your system is working, it doesn't matter why people are buying it, as long as they are. You don't have to win the argument too. That's a lot harder. So that's just my experience. But I think, you know, people should do what they feel comfortable with too. If you really feel that you're not doing it, or that this is the case that you need to make, or whatever, I wouldn't discourage that if that's your passion is. But this is our experience.
Thank you very much. And that sort of, we have similar situations here as well. So we can definitely draw from that example as well. I saw Duncan also getting quite animated about it and agreeing. Do you want to add something to it as well? I see you agreed. And do you have something to add to it as well?
Oh, no, honestly, I couldn't. That was expressed brilliantly, and I just agree with everything Dan said. I just thought it was so important and so well put. So yeah, well done.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the next question is actually directed to you, Duncan, and whether if you will be taking up any outreach activities ahead of COP26, and how do you see the youth engaging in taking the message of sustainable and climate-friendly food systems to the masses? And do you have a role for the youth to play in these activities? The question is coming from Wasita.
Well, Wasita, I just say that I think this is probably going to be the most important COP for anyone to be involved in. And I think youth are going to be more involved in it than ever before. I've been to several COPs. Every time I've been, there's been a better representation of youth. But I think with the fantastic work that Greta Thunberg and all the other young activists around the world have done to really point out how it's your generation that are being let down by the lack of action by my generation, and we need action now. And the fact that your generation have actually picked up this baton and are starting to do it, I think there's a huge role for you. There's a youth climate summit. There's going to be a youth alternate COP. There's stuff happening over the entire year. Get involved nationally, get involved locally, but you can get involved nationally and push the governments. People are listening. I think people are very, very much starting to listen and realizing that there's a change happening. So there's going to be a lot of ways to get involved. I'm more than happy to help you and others learn what some of them are going to be, because I am a little bit involved with some of them. I'm doing some work because it's in Scotland next year. The pre-COP is going to be in Italy a few months beforehand. There's going to be great opportunities, but as it's Scotland involved, I'm working with Nourish Scotland. We're doing a program. We launched it last week. It's called the Glasgow Declaration, which is getting cities, local communities and farmers to push for food action and food commitments at COP, and to have food a part of COP and other things, because previous COPs have focused on energy, almost exclusively focused on energy, not so much on land, not so much on energy, other intensive industries. Even transport's got away with it, but this COP is going to make it a lot wider. The Glasgow Declaration is trying to put food in there, also put power in the hands of local actors, believing local change happens at the local level by local people, even though and this local change will contribute to tackling a global problem. And the idea is that through getting cities and everything to sign up to Glasgow Declaration, we can have several days at COP which are focused on real action and getting commitments from national governments that lead down. But we are also working with young people and young organizations to to help escalate their voices, because we're working with them. We're not going to speak for them because they can speak for themselves 10 times better than we can. But we are supporting the actions that are going on from, say, the Youth COP, the other summits that are going on. So yes, I'm involved. There's a lot happening, and I'm more than happy to point you in the right direction if that's what you need.
Yes, that would be really fabulous if you could do that, Duncan, because there is a lot of interest, and that would go a long way here. I just have another question. I think in general, all three of you can perhaps answer this. When you are committed to a cause and when you are very passionate about it, you can be very intense about it. And then in that case, there is a possibility of scaring away your target audiences. And the youth in their passion, all of us, I think everyone would have had this sort of experience where we would have just been a little we'd get carried away with what the message that we want to put across. Is there anything that you would like to say to just be mindful of? I know it's the simplest of questions. You would have been people would have asked this all the time, but I think it is also important because we have youth engagement and the passion is there, the flair is there, the intensity is there. But how do we curb it and focus on the messaging? Maybe Duncan, maybe you could start off and then we would move on.
Yeah, I'm happy to start off. So when I'm looking at the messages, I always think of something that my father taught me when I was young. He said there's always another point of view to anything. There's always two sides to the same story. So always look for the other side. And then he said, and if you want to put it to practice, never buy the same newspaper 2 days in a row, because each newspaper will have a certain political affiliation. So if you read a story in a left-wing leaning newspaper one day, the next day read the same story in a right-wing leaning newspaper, and then you'll be able to work out sort of what's the middle ground. And I believe that's the same when you're passionate about something, and yes, you may think you've got the answers and you want to really bang on about the answers, but I've found nearly everything that I thought I had the answers for in my career, at some stage it's been disproved to a greater or lesser degree. So always be open to others' points of view, always be open to what others are saying. And I really believe in the power of listening. So keep your message simple, listen to what people say and how they respond. And even if you don't agree with it, I would argue that it's always good to go, I'm going to go away, I'm going to think about that, and can I get back to you if I need to?
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Duncan. And then Sanashia, would you also like to comment on this?
Thanks, Ramya. And I think that's a very important question, especially in 2020. And I think technology as we know it today, because as we all know, the internet never forgets. So always, I think, be mindful of what you put out there. I think the internet is such a great tool in terms of disseminating what you want to say. But again, if what you want to say might not be associated with the personality that you would want to project or the branding that you want to be associated with, there will always be a footprint of it somewhere, and someone's going to find that. And as we've seen, this always comes back to you, unfortunately. But at the same time, I think that resonating with what Duncan said, it's good to be passionate, and I think oftentimes it's this passion that drives people in the development sector more often than not. But while keeping that passion and kind of using it as an instrument, just listen to the experts, do the boring work of reading up on research and finding out the facts and, substantiating what your passion with actual scientific evidence. And find out, like, if it's an implementation project on, for example, say reducing plastic, as simple as that. I mean, look at elements of, who uses plastic, why do they use plastic, can they afford to use something that's not plastic? And if you're going to boycott plastic altogether, what about the people who've been working in plastic and doing it all their life? What are they going to do? So I think passion is important, and if you're not passionate about it, you definitely will not be in the development sector. So and I think somewhere down the line, we also lose passion by being in the development sector for so long. But I think the passion is important to maintain momentum. But like Duncan said, just maybe use your passion, but also do your reading, listen to the experts, and try to back your passion by scientific research. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanashia. And then finally, Daniel, what would you like to add to this?
First of all, believe it or not, I actually still feel like a young person. I don't know if I look that way anymore or if I actually am, but I understand what it's like to have that point of view. And believe it or not, also, what we're doing is, I don't want to say it's disruptive or whatever, but, you know, using startup language, but, you know, we're the young kids in this industry. I'm 40, and a lot of people who are making these decisions are a lot older than me. So that, and they've been entrenched in the way that it is. So I'm still kind of solid with you. I want to kind of give you a caution though, because, and I don't know throughout the world whether or not, you know, sometimes these people are really helpful. It's good to have some role models out there and some people to look up to. I appreciate that. But celebrity is also somewhat dangerous in the work that we're doing. And I'll give you one example because this may upset people. And I always like to give something. This is why I think I keep getting invited back to these things, because I keep waking people up or whatever it is. So Greta Thunberg has been unhelpful to me. I don't appreciate her work. When I go to farms, they see somebody who's in her teenage years that doesn't understand their actual practical issues in making these things happen. And there is a silent, very powerful resistance to climate change that people like her make worse. And she's a nice person, and I know that she's well-intended, and there's all that stuff there. But when I go to farms and I try to do this work, she may be brought up, and they're like, I don't have a parents that gave me a sailboat that I could use. If they are having a water usage issue, there's no funding to pay for that, to fix that. If they're using chemicals instead of some of the better regenerative practices, they don't have the labor to pull the weeds. These are the practical matters that if you're trying to solve the problem, don't go to a place and just start lecturing them about things that you read about or that you might be right about. Maybe ask them why they aren't doing it, or listen to them, or don't do it in an adversarial sort of way, because they're the ones that actually are the resistance to this. And I know that that might be like, well, I'm angry about that. Why are they resisting these obvious things? Well, they may not be able to change. There may not be funding there for them. There may not be a motivation. It's not their fault if it's not being provided. Or it could just be that because of the tribe that they're in, that a messenger like her makes them defensive to these ideas. Because a lot of people who are older than me don't like being lectured to by a 16-year-old with very little life experience and practical experience. It almost like when you see a person doing that, you're like, who put her up to this? She doesn't have a farm. She hasn't done any of this stuff. She just strongly believes it. So that's the caution I would put out there. It's not that I don't like her as a person. I'm just telling you, this is making my job harder. I think it's making it harder for a lot of people. Don't be this person. And I know that she's a role model. So that's an example. And I guess the final thing that I'd like to point out for everybody here, for young people or anybody for that matter, is there is nothing better than actually being successful at these things, because of how hard everybody says it is all the time in panels like these. If you actually are delivering the food, it's in the shelf, and you see customers buying it, the farmers are not unhappy. And by the way, it is sustainable, or closer to that. There's nothing better than that. Try to figure out a way to actually, even if it's a small way, to make something that works, because then you can keep growing it. That is the most satisfaction that you can get out of doing this, even more so than being right about an intellectual argument.
I think that's a fabulous thing to take home. Thank you, Daniel. Is there anything else that, Sanashia, would you like to add something that you'd like to specifically tell as an ending comment to the youth who are listening and to anyone who's young at heart, like me?
Thanks, Ramya. And I think I am also, I don't often like to consider myself that young, but no, I think what's important is that if you are communicating something, always, I think, communicate something you believe in. If it's not something that resonates with you, and that's okay. I mean, it's not as though you have to believe in all causes or you have to fight for all causes. You're not a hero for everybody, and you don't have to be. But if it's something that really resonates with you and something you're genuinely passionate about, use that as a driving force to move forward. So, I mean, if someone could be working like in climate change, environment, or sustainability, and someone could work for disability rights or for mental health, and one isn't more important than the other. And I don't think it's a race towards success in generating better communication outputs in either of these sectors. But understand that your heart needs to be in it, and if it isn't in it, I honestly don't think that your communication is successful. So good luck to everyone who's working on their projects. I hope your heart is in it. I hope you genuinely believe in it. And if you do believe in it, I think your funding might also be successful. So thank you.
Thank you, Sanashia. And finally to Duncan, what words of wisdom do you have for us?
Yeah, well, I'm just going to say that I'm really optimistic about the future. I think your generation have been handed a very poor future by my generation. We were warned about climate change in the 90s, and we decided not to do anything about it and fell in love with consumption instead. But I think we're picking up the baton a little bit, and your generation have done so much already. You are so much so quickly. My generation is learning, and it's starting to do a lot more. And everything I'm seeing is happening is accelerating. So I'm genuinely optimistic about the future. And I think there's a lot of positive things going to happen. It's going to be a bit of a challenge, but with digitalization of the world, with the fact that people are thinking about the future, my generation, their kids are growing up, so we're even more in touch with the future we want to change. And and the youth are leading the charge and are really pushing things and are going to be the brains that bring in how the system changes. So I think it's happening. I think the pace of change is happening quicker and quicker as we see it. I'm really excited about it. I'm sorry we didn't leave the world in a better state, but together I think we're going to be able to hit the goals we need to hit by 2030. And so I'm feeling positive.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So we have one destination, and that is a climate, a planet that is safe, a planet that we can all live in, that we have all the food that we need and we are safe. I mean, it's very simple of what we need. That is our final destination, and that is what we want for our future, to the generations to come. The paths that we take might be different, but the destination will always be the same. So communicating and getting there is our goal. So let's do that. And to do that, we are connecting to our groups again. So we have, as you know, 3 groups working on oceans and coastal ecosystems. Then we have climate change and disaster risk, as well as the final group, sustainable food systems. Now these groups have been working very hard on their final presentations, which will be showcased in our session in about, well, half an hour. So you have about 10 minutes to work, and we will get back onto the main group, and then we shall finish this session. I thank all the panelists. This has been a brilliant session, and I'm so happy with all the questions that are coming in, and which means that we are working towards a common goal, and that is a fabulous thing to do. So you can remain if you would like to. If not, I shall thank you right away. Thank you, Duncan Williamson, Daniel Beckman, and Sanashia Ekanaika for making this a really worthwhile session. And groups, get ready. It's time for your presentation, so get those final things ready, and we shall see you soon in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Ramya, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
So hi, Jesli and Tilini and Timali. Shall I share the slides for the last time?
No.
So, can you hear me? So we'll go to presentation mode. So can Tilini, can you start from here?
Okay.
Start from, because we have 10 minutes. I'll give you from this side onwards.
Okay. So I'm going to briefly introduce the mangroves. As we know, mangroves are the only trees that they are capable of thriving in salt water. Actually, they are thriving in a harsh environment, and they occur in the coastal and tidal zones in 123 tropical and subtropical countries. And the natural distribution, density, and species composition will be determined by the water quality, temperature, wave fraction, tide, sediment type, and the chemistry of seawater. And the mangroves account 0.7% of Earth's tropical forest area. And there are about 65 identified species of mangroves by 2017, and 54 out of them are true mangroves, and there are two mangroves can be classified as true mangroves and mangrove associates. So true mangroves are, they grow only in mangrove environment itself, and they are very tolerant to the salty environment. And mangrove associates grow in association to the mangrove environment, and they are partially tolerant to the salty environment. And there are 54 mangrove species, true mangrove species belonging to 7 different families, and they thrive in harsh environment, showing many adaptations like salt excretion, root aeration, vivipacy, floating properties. They show floating properties, and also they have waxy thick cuticles and shiny leaf surface. So and this picture shows, yes, this picture shows the mangrove distribution worldwide, and you can see most of them are concentrated near the equator and near the tropics. And it's like, so mangroves are very important. They can actually protect the coast. So, and also they can filter water, like 2 to 5 hectares of mangroves may treat the effluents of 1 hectare of aquaculture. And also there are benefits to tourism as well. And over 2,000 mangroves were the tour attractions globally, such as boat tours, boat walks, and kayaking. And also it contributes to the fish stock in the ecosystem. More than 300 fish species are found in mangrove ecosystems. And also it definitely helps the climate regulation. Carbon storage of mangroves is 3 to 5 times higher than that of tropical upland forest due to strong carbon storage in soil. And also it helps the livelihood of people. Nearly 120 million people live near mangrove areas, and also the mangroves give wood, but this may cause this may be a threat to the environment. And next slide. And if I say something about the threats to the mangroves, logging can cause altered species composition, fragmentation, and total clearance of mangrove forests, and also it is very much disturbed by pollution, and also the coastal development activities, urbanization, may cause loss of mangroves and degradation, and also mangrove losses. 35% between 1980 to year 2000 have been lost, 4 times higher than the overall forest loss. And also there are some threats caused by aquaculture and as well as agriculture. Next slide. And as it says, one mango tree can absorb 50 kilograms of carbon per year as an average for 20 years. So that is very important to the ecosystem. And next slide. So that's all from me. I invite Jasly to take over from here.
Hi, I'm Jasly, and to start with our project is about mangrove plantation, and project name is My Mangrove Planting Project. It's somewhat personalized, so it will be like more of youth involvement as well in this project. That's why the name is itself more personalized as well. So the time frame will be 1 year. Our project aims include some of the is to increase the mangrove forest cover within the country and the region which we will implement this project, and also to increase income and employment opportunities within the community. And also we will address to 6 SDG goals related to mangrove as well. Next slide. In this project we will be implementing this project which we are implementing, we will be focusing on these 3 SDG goals, which include no poverty, zero hunger, decent work, economic growth, and climate actions, life below water, and life on land. These 3 goals we will be focusing on. And next slide. So into more details of our project, we will be having this project in 4 phases. In phase 1 we will be conducting research, and we are going to find stakeholders and do surveys and collect data in the area, in the region which we will be planting trees, and we will be gathering findings and identifying the species which are suitable for the specific areas and regions which the project will be occurring. Yeah. And then in second phase we will be organizing awareness programs with the stakeholders, and we will approach to the stakeholders. Mostly the stakeholders will be university. We will be focusing on universities and younger groups, and sometimes somewhat like tourism and entities as well, because we will be more focusing on, but still we will be more focusing on the youth group as we proceed with our project. And also we will be engaging leadership program to these stakeholders as well. We will be conducting this phase 2 in 2 months, and in phase 3 we will be planting 10,000 mangrove trees in different regions, and like we will be spreading this in 8-month period, but in in certain regions, but we will be having in 5 stages, so that the plant like planting amount will be less in certain regions, so it will depend on the region which we will be conducting these projects. And like, because different mangrove species will be growing in, like, based on the location as well. It depends on the location. So most important and the last and most important phase which we will be in this project will be monitoring and maintaining these mangrove plants. We will do somewhat in monitoring. We will be like 1 minute. We will be monitoring the plants in a 2 to 3 years time frame, and the regions, there will be like and high profile.
So here in that slide, just say that many projects are focusing only the first three phases, but
Yeah.
our main aim is to we are giving a priority to the fourth phase as well, since monitoring and maintaining is important. Otherwise, after planting, if the plants die away, it's useless. Just tell that.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Yeah, I wrote it actually.
and then you can go to this slide.
Oh, okay. So in the monitoring phase, and like monitoring, we will be doing report back sessions with the localized group to the main host group as well. And because we will be having sub regions, so that we will be covering more areas. So, and also we will be like, plants will be given name by the planter, so there will be more personalized, like the name of the project. The plant will be named by the planter, the person who will be planting the tree. So, or the group of the people who are planting the trees will be like named. Like, plant will be named, yeah. And then we will be taking Google pictures of the areas, and also we will have a Facebook and Instagram page to share the photographs and time lapse, so that we will know the growth. And it's like to interact, to make it more interesting, and to interact more younger people in this project, and to encourage youth to um, be in to involve in this kind of projects. So, and also some of the challenges we highlighted are the language barriers, which we will be having with the stakeholders and the locals community, and some of the political and government conflicts and issues related to funding and financial capacities. And also in the implementation process, maintaining land space will be a bit challenging for us. And sometimes natural hazards like flooding and high tide might.
So Sulamita, here, continuity. Are we all back? Yes, we are. So I hope you all are all ready with your presentations for, well, we'll start in 15 minutes. So we are really excited to look for, and we are looking forward to your presentations. So go for a walk and then come back, and then we will start the closing session of the Global Youth Summit. Thank you, everybody. See you back in 15 minutes.